I'll share my world with
Alright y'all, welcome back. I didn't do a reading wrap up for April. By the time I was like, okay, like, let me put my recording hat on. We were already into like the second week in May, and I was like, yeah, it's just not happening. So I figured I would just wait until the end of May, and then I would do a reading wrap up for both April and May. So between both months, I read 5 books. Pretty okay with that number, just because April and May were super busy months with me, finishing up school. I had my birthday. Check out the birthday photo shoot vlog if you haven't already. And yeah, I was just super busy. So for the amount of limited time that I had, I was pretty satisfied with the books that I read. And now that we're into June and summer's really in like full effect, I know that I can prioritize more time just allocated for, you know, reading. Without further ado, let's just get into the books. First 2 books that I read in April were the second and third books of the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. So I read Good Girl Bad Blood and As Good as Dead. So I guess I'll just go in order. This really just follows Pip after she kind of like deals with the popularity that her podcast has gotten from the case of the first book, and trying to kind of just like navigate going back into normal life after solving like a cold case. But then someone in her town goes missing, specifically one of her friend's older brothers named Jamie, and she kind of has to make that decision of like, okay, do I kind of just want to like still swear off investigation for the sake of like my mental health and like what happened in the first book and all of that, or like, do I want to help my friend? And of course, being the person she is, she goes and she helps the friend. And man, was this book a doozy. I found that this was a really great sequel. One thing I did notice is that, especially in the beginning of the book, they would restate a lot of small details in terms of introducing characters and recounting events that happened towards the end of the book. And at first it annoyed me, but then I remembered that one, this is a YA novel, and then on top of that, when you look up when the books came out, the first book came out, and then 2 years later the second book came out. So of course, to someone who's reading these books back to back, it's very easy to be like, oh my gosh, I literally just read this like yesterday, and now I'm picking up this book and they're repeating everything. It's like, what are we doing this for? But then when you put it into retrospect, it makes complete sense. So once I realized that, it was like, okay, it didn't really bother me. This book had another twist at the end that I didn't see coming, and I love thriller books, I love thriller movies, I love anything thriller, but sometimes they're not as slick with the twists as they think, and I kind of like start to think, okay, like I can kind of have an idea of where this is going. But same thing with the first book. Like, this second one did a really phenomenal job at having a good twist that wasn't really easy to guess or to kind of like assume ahead of time, and that's definitely really appreciated. Note about Pip, she was just quite fearless. Like, the thing she was doing in this book, like, I will say if this was real life, she would have been a goner, but this is fiction, so she's gonna keep doing what she does. And honestly, like, when I finished reading this book, I was really excited to just jump into the third one, and I was really excited that I bought the trilogy in that book set so that I would be able to kind of just go ahead and jump in. Overall, I really enjoyed the book, and I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. Now, the next book in the series is As Good as Dead, and that is the third one and the final one technically in the series. This book was so good. Honestly, this trilogy as a whole made me realize that like finding a good YA author like really makes a difference. Just so many things I want to note. For one, the author did a really good job in this book. Oh, well, actually, pause. Let me tell you what this is about first. So at the end of the second book, I'm gonna try my best not to include any spoilers, but something crazy happens in regards to the missing persons case from the second book, and this kind of really alters Pip as a character and as a person in the third book. And she's really just trying to figure out like, how can she really survive and move on from the things that she's experienced. She says, all right, like, really, for real this time, I'm done investigating. But of course we know that's not the truth, and the reason why it's not the truth is because there is a local serial killer, and she's like, okay, like, I'm gonna dabble into it. And then she starts getting these really mysterious like death threats and notes and things that just insinuate that someone is very closely following her, and not even just through a social media lens or through a virtual lens, like in life, stalking, watching her. And she starts to compare the things that are happening to her to the local murder case, even though it took place I'd say like a few decades in the past, she's noticing a lot of similarities, and she's starting to believe that the person that's stalking her and the person that committed these murders, I want to say they were in the 70s and the 80s, she believes that they're the same person. It introduces a whole new like element. For the books 1 and 2, she was solving these cases for other people and kind of just out of the sake of her heart and her interest. This 3rd book really takes a new turn in terms of now she's investigating for like survival, and I found that super interesting. Now getting into the notes that I have, the author does a really great job and really just like dove deeper into how PTSD can really hinder someone's like everyday functioning and how it can really manifest from small thoughts into these bigger worries. Again, no spoilers. Now, the twist in this book, it wasn't obvious, it wasn't easily guessed, but there was a detail thrown. Well, this may be like, I'm not gonna call this a spoiler, but if you want to go into this book with no revealing information whatsoever, then maybe skip this because this might give you a hint. But there was a detail that was revealed where it's like, oh my gosh, this is groundbreaking, we know who. But something in my head was like, I think this relates to a different character, not the one that they're telling us it actually relates to. Like, I feel like the answer is actually right there in front of our faces, but it's being proposed as some like elaborate connection, speaking in riddles type thing, and I was like, no, the answer's right there. And the answer was indeed right there. So when it was revealed, I was like, it wasn't even like a, ooh, like, I guess that. It was like a, I got my detective cap on. That's how I was feeling. Another thing, in this book, Pip really like entered her villain era, and like, well, I wouldn't say in the entire book, I'd say for the second half of the book, or a chunk of the second half of the book, she really entered her villain era. I can't elaborate further, but if you read the book, you're gonna understand why I said that. And even though she did some extremely questionable things, whether they were justified or whatever the case may be, every person's gonna have a different opinion. I think it was just because I was so deeply invested in the character, and like this is the 3rd book, I read it, all the books back to back, so it felt like I was really following these characters. Like, I was rooting for Pip. I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs. Like, I was just rooting for her, period. Like, even when I was reading things, I was like, if another character did this, I would really despise them right now. But because it was Pip, I was like, you get a pass. And I feel like that just goes to show, like, when you write a really good character who's really personable and you create a connection with, it's like, you start to realize, like, you let things slide that you wouldn't let other characters slide with. But yeah, really enjoyed this book. I actually gave this book 5 stars. I was like, oh, like a 5-star rating on a YA book. I was like, oh, this is kind of a big jump. But I really just couldn't find anything extremely negative or anything that really stuck out to me that would make me want to give it a lower rating. So 5 stars it is. Okay, and the last book that I read in April was Stay Awake. This was an interesting one. So basically, this book is about a woman named Liv, and she literally wakes up one day, doesn't know what the heck is going on, memory's completely lost. She has a bloody knife in her pocket. She has all of these messages scribbled on her arm: stay awake, don't trust anyone, be careful, things like that. And she's like, literally, what is happening? And then we basically follow her throughout the book, and we time jump between 2 years ago, which is the last memory that she has, and the present time. And we kind of just jump back and forth between these timelines. So we'll jump from the present and her trying to figure out why she can't remember anything, then going back to 2 years ago and kind of working backwards, like her last known memory, and kind of seeing like what was her life like before, the dynamics that she had, the people in her life, any type of issues that were going on, and kind of just like piecing the story together as the book moves on. I would describe this as a slow burn. I don't think I'm a fan of slow burns. I feel like I just want action. I want things to just go. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just feel like some things were drawn out when they didn't need to be. Oh, also another thing. When we're doing the time jumps, we also have duo perspectives. So when we're doing the time jump from 2 years ago, we are focusing on Liv. When we jump to the present, we are either going to be following Liv, the main character, or Detective Halliday, who is a woman detective who is basically like the lead on this murder case that Liv may or may not have committed. One thing I found interesting about this dual perspective in the present time jump is that Liv spoke from a first person perspective while Detective Halliday spoke from a third person perspective. I don't know if this was done on purpose or I couldn't really find any intention behind it, but it was definitely something interesting that I noted. Some of the details in the book just felt like oddly misplaced. It felt like the book knew it was going to be a thriller, but like they wanted to throw in some elements as if it was going to be like a literary fiction. So like the main character would be like,
when I opened the fridge, we only had egg and cheese. This reminds me of the time 15 years ago when my mom abandoned me in a diner, and all I had left to fend for myself with was an egg and cheese omelet. I've never been the same since.
and then literally would pick up and be like, and then I remembered I had the murder weapon in my pocket, and then I remembered, what do I have to do? So then I left my apartment and I da-da-da-da. That's like, one, execution wasn't that great, and two, unnecessary, especially because it happened so often. There were a handful of twists in this book. Some weren't predictable, but some were, and not in the way of like what I said earlier. It was in the way of like, yeah, that was kind of like lackluster. I kind of knew that was coming. But I mean, overall, it was a good book. I just wish that some things were executed a little bit better, but overall, I don't regret reading it. It was still a good read. I gave it a rating of 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now moving on to May Reads, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I have been wanting to read this book for a super long time. I've been really wanting to dive more into literary fiction, and I know that this book is highly talked about when discussing this genre. So when I picked this book up at a bookstore, I was like, am I in for a ride? Like, I don't know. Spoiler alert, I was, bro. Like, so this book is following a main character who I'm just gonna call unnamed because she's never given a name. And she basically, like, quote unquote, has like the perfect life. She lives in New York. She's seen as like physically attractive. She has a lot of money to her name because of the trust that was left from both of her parents. She like went to Columbia. Like, she's supposed to have a quote unquote very picture perfect life. She's been dealing with large bouts of depression, and she starts to see a psychiatrist, and she wants to like kind of start this project of like literally taking a year of rest and relaxation, which really just means she finds ways to say specific things so that she can get prescribed kind of like a plethora of medications, and she kind of just like mixes and matches, which is like, I do not ever do that. Book aside, I just feel like that has to be known, because when I was reading it I was like, what? Yeah, she mixes a lot of medications and she starts to sleep for a few days on end, weeks on end, whatever the case may be. Really, the book is just following this unnamed character and her dealing with depression and trying to figure out ways to unhealthily deal with that through the use of a psychiatrist. And then we also look at her dynamics in terms of relationships, work, friendships, and a bunch of other things. And this book was literally, it was a lot. It was a lot in a good way, but it was a lot. This character really just mistreats everyone around her. And that's not to say that the people in her life are perfect, but like when they go low, she goes lower. And I mean, like, they won't even go low intentionally. It's just like they're just misguided, they may be insecure, whatever the case may be, and she's like, I'm just gonna take it 10 times lower just because I can. Like, for example, her best friend in this book is named Riva, and her mom passes away, and she comes to the character's house. She's sobbing, she's crying, she's like literally so distraught, and she just wants to be comforted by her friend. She even calls her best friend, and the main character was like, literally like is narrating the book like, I literally have no interest in her being in my apartment. I don't care to console her. Like, basically like kick rocks. Like, literally that's what she was saying, just in other words. And I just found that so crazy. I just like, it blew my mind because it wasn't just a one-time thing. Very often from the start to the finish of this book, she was a terrible person to those around her. It was insane. Also, this book was the epitome of white woman entitlement. Just some like, oh, I wish I had the book with me, because there were things that I annotated and highlighted in there that I could have used as examples. But like, both the things that she would say, it would be the things that she would say, the way she would describe people, and then just her inner monologue where it was like, no comment. there were so many unhinged events and details in this story that, like, I'm not gonna call this a spoiler because, like, it literally does not, like, I can tell you this and it will not affect the plot or anything that happens in the story or revealing anything else in any way, shape, or form. In the beginning of the story, the main character works at an art gallery. I want to say it was like in Chelsea, and she has a problem with like constantly falling asleep on the clock. Like she'll go into the janitor's class and she'll literally fall asleep, leave the desk unattended, whatever. And I guess her supervisor was just like, okay, this is enough, like finish your day's tasks and like then you're fired, you're done. And she was like locking up on her last day, and then she decided to like unarm the building, go back in, and literally take a dump on the floor, bro. And then just locks the building back up and leaves. I was like, is anyone else reading what I'm reading? Like, and then it happened, but like it didn't serve from what I remember, it didn't serve like a bigger purpose anywhere else in the book. And I was just like, what? And then, okay, I won't reveal this because this was crazy, but if you know, you know, that last page of the book, that's all I'm gonna say about that. I would like to note that the main character is also, well, I'm sure you could tell that I have this viewpoint already based on what I've said. The main character is extremely insufferable. I've never read a book where, like, okay, like how I described Pip in the earlier book, like even when she was doing things that were like put her in her like villain era, I still wanted more for her because I felt connected to her, and I saw her in other books be like a good person. But like nothing about this character made me want to feel any connection to her. She was just insufferable. But I think that was the point. Talk about a start to literary fiction. I mean, what? I gave this book 3.75 out of 5 stars. I could have pushed for 4, but the unlikableness of that main character really solidified my rating. The last book that I read in May was going to be Nightcrawling. This book, loved this book so much. So this book is following Kiara and her older brother. They live in Oakland, California, and kind of just first starts by following them navigating their lives, living like this apartment complex, and they often take care of like their next door neighbor, who I think he's like 8 or 9, but like his mom is usually in and out and isn't very consistent, kind of just dealing with them being able to pay rent because their own mother is incarcerated and their father had passed away, and really just following them navigating life and trying to keep their head above water. Rent was increased like double what they were already paying and were struggling to pay, so Kiara felt like her back was against the wall and she decided to turn to night crawling. I won't say what night crawling is, but a quick Google search will let you know. So she decides to dive into that and kind of gets introduced to a whole new world. She faces like really traumatic experiences, and throughout her experience of night crawling, she ends up being intertwined in a scandal with the local police department, and that really just like takes over her life and everything unravels from there. We navigate that with Kiara throughout the book, but then also talking about her family ties in terms of her relationship with her brother. The relationship with her dad was like her navigating any type of relationship that she may be able to have with her mom in the future. It was a fairly heavy book. I will give that warning. A lot of the stuff that was talked about in this book is important to talk about and important to recognize. I really described this book as like breathtaking. It was extremely insightful and I really did enjoy it. I really felt for the main character, Kiara, so many times throughout the book. Like I literally wish I could just jump into the pages and like physically save her from the things that she was experiencing. I should also mention that in this book, she starts off as 17 and ends the book as 18. The things that she's had to go through in her life is like, when I was leaving my storygraph review for this book, I saw someone say that they have so much to say but no words to say them in regards to reviewing this book, and I feel like that's the perfect way to describe it. The book, like I said, was great. The ending, or part of the ending I should say, really upset me. And if you've read the book, you completely understand why. And then on top of that, I just want to give another warning that there is heavy violence in terms to emotional violence, sexual violence, and systematic violence. So these are things to keep in mind when reading. Overall though, great book, impactful story, and I definitely recommend to people, and I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars. So those are the books that I read for April and May. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, thank you guys so much for watching and interacting with the video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!